2, 3, 4.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world. Or as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Welcome to one and all. I begin as always by embracing all that you bring with you this morning, all of your uniqueness, your unique beliefs, your background, your lifestyle, your experiences, everything that helps make you who you are is welcome here today. And a special welcome to those who are joining us for the first time today, or more recently to our community. We're also very glad that you're here, and of course those who are streaming with us this morning, thank you for joining us too. It's great to have you. Wanted to start with just a little bit of bad news here. You notice that our unity candle is lit at the front of our church, and this is something we light when one of our longtime members or friends has passed away, and Brad McDowell passed away earlier this week after struggling with cancer for about the past 4 years. So please keep his family, Rhonda and their girls, in your thoughts at this time. I also want to let you know that today is a special service. It is our annual Legacy service, or Legacy Sunday. I say annual. This is our second annual time, but we're looking forward to doing it for years to come, because it's an important, I think it's an important mindset for us to talk about. For those who don't know what I'm even talking about, I should explain. So the Legacy Society is what we refer to those among us who've been able to contribute to our church endowment fund. And so the mindset is really a mindset of responsibly caring for the future, even for a future we may not be part of. So that's a huge spiritual discipline that we'll be talking more about, focusing more about during our service, which will include testimonies from members of either the endowment team or the Legacy Society, or both. So we're looking forward to that, and want to let you know that there is going to be a endowment or Legacy Society luncheon in the chapel after our service. It's free, and it's an opportunity to learn and ask questions a little bit more about our endowment fund. So please stick around for that if you can. But that's all I've got right now. I do want to give you an opportunity to take just a few moments to greet one another as always. And as always, I hope that you will make some new friends along the way this morning, if possible. If you are joining us for the first time this morning, Try not to be too shy if you can help it, because we're a very friendly lot, and we're very grateful that you're here this morning. All right, well, there's lots more going on after our service today, including more opportunity to talk with one another, so do stay around for that. But let's move forward now by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
I'm Karen Dorn Steele, and I've been a member of this church since the mid-1980s. Wrong century. That's when I began investigating radiation contamination from Hanford that occurred in the 40s and 50s. that sickened many unsuspecting people in our region. This church helped challenge Hanford's official history through the Hanford Education Action League. In my reporting job at the Spokane Review, I furthered that narrative by going to federal court to pry loose the documents that proved the scope of the nuclear deception. I've had an interesting life, first as the daughter of a U.S. diplomat stationed in Europe, North Africa, and Canada, and then as a congressional aide working on major civil rights legislation in the 1960s with a congresswoman from Oregon, Edith Green, who was Oregon's Patty Murray, a former school teacher who went to Congress. I was the host of a public television show in the 1970s and then had a long career as an investigative reporter. My interest in justice and truth-telling was nurtured by this denomination long before I became a member. When in my 20s, I marched in anti-Vietnam War protests in Boston. I've long admired the brave history of Unitarian resistance to military misdeeds with our decision to publish the Pentagon Papers. I mourned the Unitarian lives sacrificed during brutal suppression of civil rights in the South. I'm in my 70s now, and a friend my age recently said to me, I thought getting old would take longer. But the march of time is relentless. And getting old means putting one's financial affairs in order with legacies to children and grandchildren, and for us, a legacy to our beloved community at this church. I've worked through our church with the Spokane Alliance, most recently as co-chair while we organized to win Earn Sick and Safe Leave for 40,000 low-income workers in Spokane, for better health care for the rural underserved, and jail diversion for the mentally ill. Todd has supported this work in his dynamic ministry. My husband Dick and I have chosen to sustain this mission long after we're gone by contributing to our church's endowment fund. Our goal is to leverage the power of this congregation and the power of its minister to achieve lasting change in Spokane.
Our first in-service hymn of the morning is actually related to our values here in this church and spans almost all the major things we hope to help in the world. It's called Wake Now My Senses. It's number 298. You can access the screen or your hymnal. Please rise in body or spirit. Wake Now My Senses.
For Good morning. Could we have all the young and the young at heart come forward? Jerry, I thought you were going to come. He looked like he was about to come. You come closer if you want. Want to come closer? Hi. Welcome. So, how many of you know the story of Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout? Yes. Well, Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout would not take the garbage out. She'd scour the pots and scrape the pans, candy the yams and spice the hams. But though her daddy would scream and shout, she simply would not take the garbage out. And so it piled up to the ceilings, coffee grounds and potato peelings, brown bananas, rotten peas, chunks of sour cottage cheese. Ugh. It filled the can, it covered the floor, it cracked the window, and it blocked the door. With bacon rinds and chicken bones, drippy ends of ice cream cones, prune bits, peach bits, orange peel, gloppy glumps of cold oatmeal, pizza crusts and withered greens, soggy beans and tangerines, crusts of blackburn buttered toast, bristly beets of beefy roast. The garbage rolled on down the hall and it raised the roof. It broke the wall. Greasy napkins, cookie crumbs, globs of gooey bubblegum, cellophane from green bologna, rubbery, blubbery macaroni, gugh, peanut butter caked and dry, curdled milk and crusts of pie, moldy melons, dried up mustard, eggshells mixed with lemon custard, cold French fries and rancid meat, yellow lumps of cream of wheat. At last, the garbage reached so high that finally it touched the sky, and all the neighbors moved away, and none of her friends would come to play. Finally, Sarah Cynthia Stout said, "Okay, I'll take the garbage out." But then, of course, it was too late. The garbage reached across the state from New York to the Golden Gate. And there in the garbage that she did hate, poor Sarah, now she met an awful fate that I cannot right now relate, because the hour is much too late. So children and people, remember Sarah Stout, and always take the garbage out. So tell me, what do you think was going on for Sarah? Why did she not take that garbage out?
I think that it's just because that she had too much stuff that she didn't like to, and she wouldn't because her head keeps saying no, no.
No, yeah. How many of us sometimes say, no, not going to do it, not going to do it? Sometimes we say, I have too much stuff to do. Sometimes we say, that's not my job. How many of you ever said, but he was supposed to do it yesterday? And we point our finger. We always have so many reasons about why we don't do things. And I don't think it's just about garbage, is it? It's not just about dishes, it's about lots of things. And I think about all the times, every single day I have a decision, actually many decisions about things that I can do, and I have to ask myself, am I going to do it today? Because you know what? Oftentimes those things that I decide not to do, they don't necessarily hurt me, but they often hurt the people around me, and sometimes they hurt people that aren't even here yet, like people that aren't even born yet, who will be somehow impacted by my decision. So, can I leave us with this challenge? Even if it's not the garbage or the dishes, that maybe it's something else, like picking up a piece of garbage if we see it somewhere, or maybe washing out our Ziploc bags and reusing them, or walking instead of driving, whatever that is. Can we each think of one thing that we could do that can leave our world a better place for the people coming after us, so that we do not become Sarah Cynthia Sylvia Stout? Sound good? All right, thank you.
we light this second chalice so that the children and youth may go to their chapels and they may carry the light of the flame with them. May it illuminate, inspire, and warm you as it does us.
Good morning. My name is Jerry White, and shortly after joining the church, I made a donation to the endowment fund and included the fund in my will. I did this because I consider the church to be one of the most significant voices for progress towards a more healthy, caring, and inclusive Spokane community. There's now a tradition, second year in a row, in our church of having a Sunday service and special collection that focuses on our endowment fund. By using the white envelopes this Sunday, you can make a contribution to the fund. The fund is now large enough to be making yearly contributions to our budget and hence to the betterment of our church and community. I hope you will make a contribution, even if it's a small amount. And when you do so, please do not seal the envelope as we recycle them. So, this is the time of the service when we take up a collection in order to sustain this church and carry out our mission and contribute to the wider world.
This is the offertory. This is the offertory.
Have a merry January and a merrier February, with March and April following, leading you into the spring. You will wake one fine day to the easy to take month of May. Raise a balloon in June, fly through the sky in July. August is too hot to move, so shift into a slower groove. Things will pick up when September gives you golden days to remember. October will provide a scene of red and gold outside. Have some turkey in November, celebrate in December. Have a merry January and a merrier February. Have a merry
Thanks again. We're now going to kindle our candles of care for those who are on our hearts and minds this morning. And going to begin with another candle for Rhonda McDowell and her entire family at this difficult time. Church member Barbara Nelson would like us to kindle a candle on behalf of her sister Karen Warren, who lives in Eugene, Oregon, but came up with a mysterious illness yesterday that she's worried about. So let's take a moment of silence on behalf of others that you might be thinking of, and as always, you're welcome to name them at this time if you'd like. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion.
This church was started in Spokane in 1887. That's 133 years ago. None of us were around then. None, I would venture to say, very few or none of our parents were around then. I believe my grandmother was born a couple years after that. I tried to imagine what it felt like to be one of those first few who was starting a different kind of religion in the far west. This was the Wild West at that time. And how that has carried on for 133 years. This church has gone through ups and downs, high times, great times, low times. When John Dietrich was a minister, services were held in a theater downtown to overflowing every Sunday, and the sermons were published in the Spokesman Review, or whatever the name of the paper was at that time, every Monday morning. A number of years later, the church almost disappeared, had no building, and met in members' homes. But it continued, and that spark, that thread, continues to this day. When I think of all of the things that have come out of this congregation as a church, or members of this congregation who get support and inspiration from our church, I wonder, it's almost like the Jimmy Stewart It's a Wonderful Life movie. You know, what would our Spokane area be like without the Unitarian Church? I don't think I want to see. Karen mentioned the Hanford Education Action League, which I believe had an impact not only on the state of Washington, but nationally, a very important impact. Planned Parenthood was started by some members of this church. The first Pride Parade in Spokane originated with members of this church. I could go on and on. During the break between the first and second service, Tom Bradabo came up to me and he said, well, you know, it was members of this church that got phosphorus out of dishwashing detergent. I didn't know that. Marriage equality, I believe, passed in the state of Washington because an effort by members of this church who met with other like-minded folks got it passed in Spokane County, which I believe was enough to push it over on the state level. The impact that this small congregation has is way beyond the size. And so now I look to 133 years in the future. I have no idea what that's going to be like, just as I imagine the men and women who founded this church 133 years ago would have a very hard time envisioning what we were today. Maybe there will be a colony on Mars that has Unitarian Universalist services on their Sundays. I can't imagine. I don't know how it will be. But I know that I want it to be here. And our endowment fund is one way that we can help ensure that that happens. We are able to contribute, as others have said, to our operating budget, and that helps to ensure that this church goes on. We give to the future, we give to the present, and I think if we each do what we can for the positive growth of the future of this church and this community, we can't help but succeed. I also want to mention that we're having the luncheon. We're inviting all of you to come. It's not a push to give. It's an information session where you can ask questions, hear more about it. At the same time, there's another kind of future being discussed in the RE wing, where a much more immediate future, where we're going to be talking about what we're looking for in a new director of religious education to form the lives of the children of our church, which are another way of looking at our future. So I encourage all of you to attend one, attend both. If you're a couple, you could split them up. I encourage you to participate, think about the future, and think about our impact and what we can each do. Thank you.
About 2 decades ago, I became a member of this church. I signed the membership book, went through a Sunday morning induction, was given my rose, and after a bit, received my name tag, which, as an aside, I noticed I had left at home when I arrived at church today. So I'm including my name tag here by, including it by reference, which is perhaps not the most effective way of using a name tag, but there it is. Joining the church was a good decision for me. Since that time, I've enjoyed the church's social events. I've hosted holiday caroling evenings in our home, marched in demonstrations with the UU contingent. I've sung in the choir, worked on the music team. I phone banked for gay marriage. And in recent years, I've appreciated and grown with Todd's forward-looking ministry. And this year, I became a member of the endowment team, which brings me to the endowment. I joined the endowment team because I feel that a robust and prudently managed endowment is a desirable thing. It can help provide resources to support good works within the congregation and also in the wider world. It was only a few years ago that our endowment passed the important $500,000 threshold, below which we had opted to plow all the interest back in to the principal in order to promote maximum growth. When we reached the threshold, we began to withdraw modest amounts, 4 to 6% as the recommended range, to boost our UUCS annual operating budget. Last year, that endowment dividend pumped nearly $20,000 into our budget. And this year, we look to meet or beat that amount. I view this endowment dividend as a force multiplier of sorts. We as a congregation choose our priorities, but these additional resources can help us realize them. One concrete example, for several years, the UUCS has been a dues-paying member organization of the Spokane Alliance, which is a nonpartisan coalition of progressive churches and labor unions and nonprofit organizations that join forces to work for progressive change in the community. In recent years, the Alliance, with the energetic participation of UUCS members, has helped bring the Elsness Boyd School of Medicine to Spokane, enacted an apprenticeship ordinance for the city of Spokane that requires a certain number of construction contract jobs be allocated to union apprentices, and has passed a municipal sick and safe leave ordinance that served as a model for the state of Washington's subsequent law. This is our church in action in the world, which I fully support. If you're interested in learning more about the endowment and what it does and how you can participate, I invite you to join us after the second service here for a delicious, healthy, gratis lunch back in the chapel. The endowment team will be your hosts, and we will also be your chefs. And I guarantee, tastes like $1 million.
The choir is going to sing you a simple hymn this morning. It is actually a poem by Louis Untermeyer, and if you want to follow the words, it's hymn number 1 in our book. In the old blue hymnal, it was called Prayer for This House, which I like that title very much, so that's what we have put it in the program as. And I think you will find it very familiar. It has been used in this church for many things and for many years. It was also used when we came into this building, when we dedicated this building. So, prayer for this house.
Beautiful sentiments, for sure. As we celebrate our annual Legacy Sunday, keep in mind that it is about something greater than our church endowment fund. Not that I'm shy at all about promoting our endowment fund. It's important, and I'm extremely grateful to everyone who has contributed to it or has promised to contribute to it in their wills including those who are still with us, and of course those who are not. The endowment helps sustain our mission. Since reaching our goal of $500,000 3 years ago, it has added $30,000 to our budget and will add another $26,000 to next year's budget. That's $56,000 towards sustaining the mission of this church in just 3 years. That's incredible, right? So I want to begin really by thanking our endowment team. So if anybody here is on the endowment team or has been, if you don't mind standing or raising your hand so we can thank you, it would be wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all so much. It's grown today to about 644,000. Marie just checked, so $644,000 endowment, and that's just incredible. So thanks to everyone who has contributed to this incredible legacy over the years. Yet I also want to point out that contributing to our endowment fund is based on a principle and value that is often overlooked by our greater society and world. Indeed, it is so remote from our thinking, so usually remote from our thinking, that there's no real standard word for it, no standard way of putting it. It's not like freedom or reason or democracy, that we know what it means and we feel the sanctity of it by the utterance of one hallowed word. It's an elusive principle that we feel only nebulously when it's absent. A sentiment that is understood mostly in retrospect, right? Geez, I wish I had thought of that before now. We should have planned better. Or if you happen to be those who suffer from the consequences of our short-sightedness, what were they thinking? How could they have been so irresponsible? Why didn't they see this coming? They just didn't care. We need only consider global warming and the environmental disaster now upon us to grasp what I'm talking about. It should come as no surprise, because we've known about the greenhouse gas effect for more than 100 years. Scientists began warning us it was happening more than half a century ago, and we've been witnessing the frightening and undeniable impacts over just the past few decades. And I won't call them chilling, not because the word doesn't actually go with warming, right? But because the powers that be have worked almost tirelessly to ignore and to deny it. So for the status quo, there's nothing chilling about it. It presents no reason to change our way of doing things. The status quo cares only about now, this moment in history, not about the future, especially the future of others, or even if history itself should continue. The status quo is to make sure the future remains just like now. But ignoring this sacred principle isn't only because of negligence and selfishness. I suspect it more often occurs out of necessity and desperation. The reality is that throughout much of civilized history, marked by the advent of agriculture, most people have lived from hand to mouth. We haven't been living under economies of plenty, but of scarcity. Not of sustainability, but of subsistence. Since then, most people haven't been able to plan for or even impact the future because they have necessarily had to focus on surviving the day. And nowadays, that means worrying about paying this month's rent or this month's mortgage, pay the bills, or of just having enough to eat for the kids, something to fill their hungry bellies, whether it's healthy food or not, because healthy food is a luxury that some people can't worry about right now. In agrarian societies, which is what our entire world has become, an agrarian society, there has always been a few of us with great wealth, and the rest of us who are just getting by. This was the basis of economist Thorstein Veblen's 1899 book, The Theory of the Leisure Class, which outlined the ways in which the most menial of labor-intensive jobs are relegated to people subjugated by those who do the least. It's why philosophers like Plato and Aristotle looked down upon the working class, because they saw labor as a corrupt and complete waste of time meant for unintelligent people who need to be led by those who can afford to sit around and think about things. It's why the Greek word for work, ponos, also means pain. It's why the powers that be combated the global labor movement of the early 20th century with the Red Scare and McCarthyism and the so-called Cold War, which we're still working our way through today. It's at least partly to blame for the war on terror and for the Occupy movement and the Arab Spring. It's why income inequality has become such a major issue of our day. Throughout history, William Herzog says, advanced agrarian societies were two-tiered. The top tier was occupied by the ruler, the ruling class, retainers, and a few merchants. The bottom tier was occupied by peasants, artisans, merchants, the unclean, and the degraded, and at the very bottom, the lowest of the lows, the expendables. You can see the expendables in your mind right now, right? You know who they are on our streets to this day. Those who meant absolutely nothing. Throughout civilized history, the great majority of people have been on the bottom tier. Today, fortunately, the number of those living in extreme poverty is lower than ever. And most of us have access to technologies like indoor plumbing and the internet that make yesterday's tycoons look like paupers in many ways. In 1800, 85% of us lived in extreme poverty. By 1966, it was down to 50%. You know what the percentage is globally today? People living in extreme poverty? 9%. It's a dramatic change. As a result, for example, according to Hans Rosling's book Factfulness, in 1972, Bangladeshi women had on average 7 children, and life expectancy was 52. Today, Bangladeshi women have 2 children, and that newborn can expect to live for at least 73 years. So things have gotten and are getting better for billions of people, but even so, most are still living hand to mouth, meaning that they may have enough to get by on, but are still essentially subsistence farmers. They remain only one economic disaster, the loss of a job, an economic recession, sudden inflation, a costly illness, and they lose it, and they lose everything. All of this is to say that financial planning for people throughout history and to this day is a luxury that most could not afford. We may want better things for our kids and our grandkids, and even for descendants we'll never know. But how many can afford to worry much about things beyond right now. So human history has been dominated by those who either don't worry about the future because they have enough, some of whom won't buck the status quo, or mostly by people who simply don't have the luxury to worry about it. In both cases, people don't concern themselves about the future because it's costly. Taking care of tomorrow is extremely expensive. Another facet of the problem is that those among us who legitimately can't afford to worry about the future also have little choice but to participate in the behaviors and systems that actually are impairing the future. Let's take our overuse of plastic as just one example. We use hundreds of millions of tons of plastic around the world every year, about half of which is single-use plastic, meaning that it goes straight into the garbage. Unwrap that piece of candy. It's a little thing like that. The problem, as we all know, is that that little wrapper takes somewhere between a few hundred years and about 1,000 years to deteriorate, to decompose. And it's causing a lot of problems for lots of people, animals, and environments, especially the ocean, all over the world in the meantime. Some of you may remember that I've been saving my non-compostable garbage for a year, since Earth Day last April. Today, about 2/3 of the way through the project, I have over 20 large boxes containing either paper and cardboard, cans and other metals, glass, and plastic wrappers and containers. About 80% of it is plastic. Much of it is supposed to be recyclable, but I also know that less than 10% of the world's plastic actually gets recycled. So how has this awareness changed my shopping habits? Hardly at all. Hardly at all. I certainly do feel a lot more guilt about everything I buy. And I'm not exactly smitten by that ever-fattening plastic house guest staying in my home. But it turns out almost everything we buy these days comes wrapped in single-use plastic. Single-use plastic is the ticket that gains us access not only to today's luxuries, but also to many of our basic needs. Loose fruits, vegetables, bulk foods are accompanied by reels of conveniently located plastic bags to put them in. If most of the foods we buy, including produce, aren't already in a plastic container or plastic wrapping. Tools, toothpaste, shampoo and soap, vitamins, medicine, light bulbs, and so much else comes in plastic wrappers or containers. So if I want to have any of the ordinary things, these ordinary things, the things that make my life convenient, as well as many genuine necessities, I have to remain part of the problem. Otherwise, life's going to be really hard. Whether I live with my garbage and see it, stacking up in my own house, or throw it away, which I am looking forward to doing again in April, I'm reluctantly engaging in behavior that is detrimental to the future. All of this, again, is to suggest it isn't usual for most of us to consider our responsibility to the inhabitants or habitats of the future, either because we don't want to, or more likely because we can't afford to, or are systemically powerless to do anything about it. Caring about the future, being responsible for the future is overwhelming, it's costly, and often something we've just learned not to think about. This is why the principle behind our endowment fund and those comprising our legacy society are worthy of raising up in one of our annual church worship services. Because that's what worship means, right? Worthy. In Unitarian worship services, we don't grovel, we raise up the things that we think are worth raising up, worth lifting up before us for consideration. It means that we are doing the hard work. We're doing the costly work, the rare work of thinking about our responsibility to the future of this congregation and to new members, some of whom, as Marie Bjork said earlier, that we will never know. Few of us know any of the names of those who founded our church 133 years ago in 1887. I don't know any of them, actually. Yet, we are their legacy. We are here today because they put systems and resources into place to make sure that our church survived past them, without them. Having an endowment fund that not only helps sustain us now, but also preserves its principle in perpetuity, meaning that we're committed to not spending that part of it, is an intentional expression of this nebulous principle that so few of us ever think about. Caring for the future, caring for people that we'll never know and who likely will never know our names. I'm calling it leaving it forward, kind of like paying it forward that we're more familiar with. Paying it forward means doing something good for someone else because somebody has done something similar for us. Leaving it forward, to me, means not using up all of our resources for ourselves now so that others can use them later. That's why I say it's a principle that's about more than our endowment fund, though our endowment fund demonstrates this religious practice. If throughout our agrarian history people had been leaving it forward instead of scraping and scrapping to get by, global warming wouldn't be a problem today. If we'd been leaving it forward all along, we wouldn't just be celebrating the near end or nearing end of extreme poverty today, which extreme poverty is the low-hanging fruit. We wouldn't be dealing with poverty at all. If we'd been leaving it forward just thinking a few years or maybe even a few weeks or just a few days sometimes in advance, then we would still be in war in Iraq and Afghanistan after almost 2 decades. And we certainly wouldn't be on the brink of war with Iran. Leaving it forward means considering the welfare of tomorrow, of tomorrow's generations. It means spending our thoughts and spending our energy and spending our resources and our wealth to make sure that people that we will never know will have what they need. Wealth, health, peace. In my opinion, every church, as a matter of spiritual discipline and integrity, should have an endowment. It doesn't matter how small or large it is, because that's not what an endowment is about. It's about walking our talk. As people of faith, no matter the faith, compassionately incarnating our beliefs requires us to care for the welfare of all beings, not just those alive today, but those who will come on the morrow. Many religions instruct us to be kind to strangers. Leviticus, the Hebrew book of law, says that we should love strangers as ourselves, for you were once strangers yourselves. Jesus said, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. The Apostle Paul said, don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so you have entertained angels without knowing it. The children of tomorrow may be strangers to us, strangers that we will never know, yet we inhabit their earth. We establish their economy, and we are responsible for their welfare. We must be kind to these strangers by endowing them with all the promise that we can manage to create for them today. When I came here almost 9 years ago, our endowment was about $180,000, which some understandably thought was too much, given that we had financial needs and could have taken care of them then. But the endowment team and I started dreaming bigger. We began thinking about waiting until it reached $500,000 before ever taking advantage of any of its gains. In this way, rather than spending it all at once, which would not have gone long, it could help sustain us every year from now on, which, as I said, has already amounted to $56,000 to our budget in only 3 years. Who knows what this extraordinary gift, the thoughtful act of kindness towards strangers, this spiritual discipline of compassion for others, will contribute to our members 100 years from now. Recently, I've been dreaming about what it would look like to build our endowment to $10 million. You're looking around saying, where's that going to come from? Why? So that our church could use it to help sustain the social justice work that's going on in our greater community. Some think that sounds impossible, but that's how some felt just a few years ago when we began aiming for only $500,000. Just a few years ago. Now it's $644,000. It's going to be $1 million before long, mark my words. But I believe it's a worthy goal and not an entirely impossible dream. There are people in our church, but also in Spokane, who would appreciate an opportunity to know that their financial donations are not single-use gifts, but could be used to help sustain the work of the organizations they care about in this community far into the future. So I say, let's dream big. But for now, our endowment, our practice of endowing the future, isn't the only point of today's message. It's an example of this relatively rare practice of thinking ahead, thinking about the welfare of strangers, of bearing the cost of a future that isn't ours, rather than making our descendants pay the price for our short-sightedness. Whether we're able to contribute to our church endowment fund or not, the principle of leaving it forward is a moral value for all of us, no matter our circumstances, that we ought to consider. It means leaving the entire planet richer and healthier by our presence than when we found it. How does what we do now impact the lives of those who come later? How can what we do now make their lives better? How can what we do make things better for people we will never know? It is unlikely that the children of the future will ever benefit from what we leave behind if we haven't first considered what we are leaving forward. Thank you.
Please stand in body or spirit for the last hymn of the morning. All are architects. All are architects of fate, working in these walls of time, some with massive deeds and great, some with ornaments of rhyme. For the structure that we raise, time is with materials filled. Our todays and yesterdays are the blocks with which we build. Build today strong and sure, with a firm and ample base, and ascending and secure, shall tomorrow find its place.
These are the words of Unitarian Universalist minister John Burens. Blessed are those who know that the work of this church is the transformation of society, who have a vision of beloved community transcending the present, and who do not shrink from controversy, sacrifice, or change. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.